The 2014 election was historic for a couple of reasons. It was the largest democratic exercise ever held in human history. It produced the first single-party majority government in India in 3 decades. And it created this very charismatic leader in Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who I think has attracted a lot of attention and controversies from some quarters. But it was important, I think, for an even more fundamental reason, is that it raises questions about the nature of the Indian voter and whether or not this is a watershed in how she behaves. And the paper finds that actually there are some ways in which this does represent a kind of new moment for the Indian voter, but in a whole host of different ways, there's actually a lot of continuity with how the Indian voter has behaved in the past. There are two examples of continuity. One is that we still see that the quality of the kinds of people who are elected to public office hasn't really changed all that much. So in India, there's this phenomenon of politicians who get elected who have criminal records. And what we find is that the largest percentage ever of members of parliament have criminal records in 2014. The second is family politics has been something which has been a hallmark of Indian politics since the time of independence. And we see again that about 1 in every 5 members of parliament comes from a political family. So these are two ways in which Indian voters really have not changed in terms of their political preferences. One of the big takeaways from this election is that the share of the vote going to national versus regional parties has held relatively constant over the last several election cycles. So about 50% of the vote goes to national parties and 50% goes to regional parties, and that trend hasn't changed. What has changed is if you look at which national parties are getting vote share, the BJP has clearly trumped the Congress Party. And that's a really big shift because it now means that the BJP has become the sort of central pole around which political competition revolves. And that's a designation that the Congress Party has held for almost the 6 decades since Indian independence. Another really big takeaway is the fact that economic assessments seem to matter much more for the Indian voter. So that means that when they're deciding who to vote for on election day, they're looking at how well the economy is doing and deciding whom to vote for on that basis. And that's been pretty standard in places like the United States, but has not been a feature of Indian politics. That doesn't mean that old attachments related to identity, to caste, to religion or ethnicity have withered away. But the most successful politicians in India are finding ways to marry these two appeals to status concerns and identity on the one hand, and the desire of the Indian voter for greater governance, for greater development, for a greater standard of living. And I think that's really an interesting marriage that represents something new in terms of the evolution of the Indian voter.